Welcome back to the Daughters of the Moon podcast. We're grateful that you can join us for another week. And we have a special guest today, Kate. Oh, I should have got this ahead of time. Nguy?
You got it. You got it.
Excellent. Okay. So Kate is the womb revivalist, is a menstrual cycle and fertility coach, and the host of the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. She's known for her deep interest and enthusiasm for teaching women how to weave the wisdom of their cycle, also known as cycle syncing, into all elements of their life for inspired living. It's Kate's mission to help women to radically defy the stories that are told about their body so that they can attune to the sacredness of their cycle and feel empowered in their body's ability to heal through alignment of the womb and divine feminine energy. It's her passion to bring ancient wisdom to meet the modern body. So welcome, Kate. We're really excited for you to be on and to talk about this. I think this is important for women. So
yes. And from the lens I kind of operate out of, we look at the womb space as something that never dies, even once you get to menopause. It is something that stays with you until the day that you're no longer earthside. And so, for those that are listening that maybe are post-menopause, everything that we're going to talk about here is going to be wisdom for you as well. So
good. Excellent. Yeah. So how did you get started on your journey?
Well, I think the catalyst that started the journey would have been my fertility journey. I met my husband when I was 30, and when we were 32, we decided to start having children, and I went through several ectopic pregnancies. And in that short period of time, in 2 years of having 3 ectopic pregnancies, I had gone to go see a IVF specialist because that's where I was sent. And without any kind of exploration of my womb space or my fallopian tubes, it was just told that I should remove my body parts and I should get the fallopian tubes removed, go right to IVF. And I was in my early 30s, and IVF is bloody expensive. And so if we would have done that route, it would have meant that I would have only had one child ever, because the removal of the body parts, once they're gone, they're gone. And so, it just didn't sit right with me. I left that appointment going, this can't be what we're telling women. We can't just be saying you're broken. We're going to just remove pieces and we'll figure it out. There was no answers. There was no explanation. There was no why it may have happened. It was just this experience that left me feeling really gross about what we're teaching women about their bodies. And at that point, I had zero experience working in alternative medicine. I had never gone to an acupuncturist. I had never done any of that stuff. I came from a small town and we relied on doctors and we didn't question anything. And it was my first big hurdle where I was like, this can't be. And so I went on my own quest to figure it out. And when I say I tried everything, I tried everything. I carried a rose quartz crystal in my bra. I went to an acupuncturist. I went to an energy healer. I did everything. And I healed my body. And I went on to have 3 pregnancies all on my own. Oh, and nice. And it was through that journey of learning how to heal my body that I wanted to help other women. So it started off with working with fertility, but the more I began to dive into it, I went back to school, became a yoga therapist. I did my practicum all around women's health. And the more I got to learn about the menstrual cycle, it was like, this works for fertility, but this also works for women's vitality and also longevity. We need to be working on this stuff now and creating awareness around it, so that women can have amazing years in their 70s, their 80s, because what happens in our menstrual cycle ultimately helps us with bone density and cardiovascular health and diabetes. So it affects every system. And so telling women that their menstrual cycle doesn't matter is hogwash. So I'm here to revolutionize how we see our bodies.
I think that's wonderful because, I think it's too often that, especially, I think the world's becoming a little more open, but I think for so long, that's really what it was. The doctor was like, here, this is happening to you. Let's do this. Right. And it was so extreme what they want to do. And so I think it's great. And I love that you say that it's a part of our life, even after we do the menopause, because I'm just in that perimenopausal stage. So, you're kind of trying to figure out and go down that path. So
Yeah, I met this amazing teacher out of the UK, out of England, and that's where I think a lot of my training started to shift, because as a yoga therapist, you're still very clinical. Like, you're still looking at evidence-based research. You're still working, like, a lot of the instructors that I had in that course, or those 2 years of training, were psychologists and registered nurses and physiotherapists. So it was still a lot of science. And it was just by like this is where I think like the universe always has your back. It was this weird experience of, I was working with fertility clients with yoga therapy, and I had reached out onto this group on Facebook for yoga teachers, just saying, and it was a worldwide one, of just saying, hey, I'm looking for some new resources around fertility. Does anyone know any good books? Because I can't find any. And this person in Toronto, who I'd never talked to, reached out to me with a private message saying, hey, I've done this training out of the UK. My teacher's coming to Calgary for the very first time, and it starts next week. She might have spots available. I had no idea what I was signing up for, but I was like, okay. I looked it up. She had a spot still available. I jumped on the spot. I drove up to Calgary the next weekend, which is only a 3-hour drive for me. And it changed everything for me. And her teachings are really around the spiritualness around the womb space, more of the sacred, more of the ancient teachings of looking at our cycle, not so much as these biomarkers or as what's physiologically happening, but actually starting to look at them in relationship to how we orientate with Mother Nature and the other cycles that are around us. And so her whole theory is that once you have your first bleed, your initial bleed at puberty, that awakens your womb space, and that never dies. And we live cyclically as women until we die. And so even postmenopause, if we don't have that biomarker of a bleed, we are still cycling with the moon. We are still feeling those shifts. And it's actually a lot of fun. And I think this is why I really bought into it, and it really has become all encompassing in my life, is once you go on this journey of starting to really feel into the energies of your 4 seasons internally, it just gives so much compassion. It gives so much awakening and helps you shift and gets you curious. And I can see how you could still feel it even without the physical marker, because we have environmental seasons, we have moon cycles, we have all these cycles around us, and we mimic them. And it's really a fun and beautiful experience to get playful with it and to start to shift your life that way. And it has changed everything from my parenting skills to how I exist in my marriage. Like, it's been a game changer.
wow, that's really cool, because I think we're all trying to deal with life and stress and family and maturing and all of those things. So if you can figure this out, or at least get a little, key to it, it's nice to know that. And so I'd be interested to hear how it goes from what you've learned to into your family life and into your
Mhm.
relationships and stuff.
So once you understand the basis of the energy behind your womb space, and I always like to describe it, and this is what I describe it as. I don't know if I've ever heard this anywhere else, but the uterus and the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, those are all body parts, but the womb space is like the energetic house that holds all of them, right? Which is why it doesn't get affected by menopause or by a hysterectomy or, shifts in our cycle. And so once we know that, what we do is we tune into that we have these 4 seasons. Like the first level would be looking at our womb space out of 4 seasons. And so just like we have a winter, a spring, a summer, a fall, we have the same thing happen internally. And so when we're in our menstruation, our bleed days, or if we're looking at the moon cycle for those that aren't bleeding or are postmenopause or have a hysterectomy, the dark moon, it's when everything kind of goes dark. It's where our intuition is the most heightened. It's where the barrier between the left and the right side of the hemisphere of the brain becomes its thinnest. So our intuition's heightened. We see in the darkness. This is when our true wisdom comes out. It's a time for us to rest and reflect, just like we would in winter. I don't know about everybody else, but when it's winter, I'm not thinking, hey, this is the time to train for a marathon. I'm like, give me a cup of tea, put me in front of a fire, and don't ask me to do anything. And that's what our menstruation's doing, right? That's our inner winter. And then we go into our inner spring, and our inner spring is what is our follicular phase. And that is when if you are still cyclical with an actual bleed, your follicles are developing and being released so that they can become that egg that gets released at ovulation. So it's a really big building phase. So this is a time, like just like spring outside, where we can start to see the sun melting the ground. We start to see the grass popping through. We get that urge of like playfulness is about to happen. Like we get really kind of excited. And that's what estrogen, the primary hormone in the first half of our cycle, does for us. It primes our brain to be social. It makes us want to be outward. Our vocabulary actually increases here. So this is a great time to pick fights with partners if you want to. Just be able to outward them. Like you can argue your way through anything here. And that is the emergence, right? Like we are coming out of that dark and we're feeling spunky. We got lots of ideas. Right. Like we've rested, we've cared for ourselves. And then when we go into our summer, and for us right now, we are in our inner summer where this is our fullness of energy. And that's because we have estrogen, we have testosterone, we also have progesterone starting to come in the system. So this is where like the full cocktail of hormones starts to happen here. And this is where we ultimately feel our best. And because we have all of the hormones kind of activated here, this is the time where our brain is really primed for us to be empathetic. This is where like they call it the mother phase. And it's because not because we're mothers here, but we can listen, we can digest information. We don't take things so personally, and we really become good listeners. We attract people, and yet we have so much energy to extend ourselves. Kind of like the full moon. This would be our full moon phase if we don't have a cycle. It's the brightest, it's the fullest. This is when you can see the most, even on the darkest night, right? And so this is what's happening internally in our body, is like we are vibrating with so much energy. And so this is where we like to stay up later. This is where we don't need as much sleep. This is where, we just really become playful, right? Like we would in summer here. I know about myself. I challenge all the boundaries about what you should be doing for your health in the summer. And that's what happens during ovulation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you're right, because you do those things in the summer, right? To much more than in the winter when, like you said, we hibernate and, sit in the house and
we don't socialize as much.
No,
none of those things. And then the fall comes in, and I don't know about anybody else, but I have young kids. And so by the time September hits, I'm like, routine. Thank God there's routine. Like you just thrive for it, right? Like you no longer the center of attention. You just want to get stuff done now. Like now is the time that we sit down and we get stuff done. And that is our progesterone. Estrogen is kind of, it's still there a little bit, but it's not the dominant rated. It makes us feel sluggish. It doesn't make us feel partner touching me. I don't want it. If that's all your inner fall, you just leave me alone, right? Like I have tons of to-do lists during my fall. I'm sticking notes everywhere because I just want to thrive to get things done, but I also don't want to visit with anybody, right? And that's our fall. And then it rinses and repeats again. And so once you know this as your core, you could apply it to everything in life. And this is what I call cycle syncing. So like with my parenting, for instance, and it's been a challenge to put this into practice this summer, is that I can hold play dates in my summer and in my spring, in my internal spring and summer, because that is where I'm most outgoing, right? That's where we have our outward energy, where the fall and the winter are more inward. And so I try to like bulk up the play dates. I know I can overextend myself here and still be the fun mom. I generally don't get as grouchy. Although today was a little bit of a challenge. I'm in my spring and today was a challenge. But then like in the fall, I know it's a no-go for crafts. Like I cannot handle the mess. I can't handle the sparkles everywhere. Like it's just, it all like just becomes this really increased irritation for me. And so knowing what your body is going through, and everyone's system's a little bit unique. So once you know your 4 seasons and you kind of feel into how do I feel in each of them, you kind of know where your strengths are, and you kind of know like what are your no-go zones, right? Some people love crafts no matter what season. I am like a no-go for for the inner fall or the inner winter, right? And then I
Right.
set really strong boundaries in my winter where it's like I have zero capacity. I need to rest. I need to take care of myself. Because if you don't, what happens is after a few cycles, you get a really painful period or you get heavy bleeding. Your body starts to scream at you because you haven't been listening, you haven't been shifting, right? And so, like I gave the example of parenting, but you can do the same thing with your work life of how can we restructure our duties so that we're really supporting our body. And it may seem like, well, that's impossible because I work for somebody, but it's like, well, can we do most of our public speaking or sales or, those conversations we have to have in the first half of our cycle? And the second half, can we primarily focus on our filing, our email cleanup, our, writing templates? Like, can we do the task that requires to isolate ourselves a bit more in the second half? And can we rearrange the first half this way? And you'd be amazed at how much that can help you feel more balanced. And then when you do have to do something that's not aligned with your cycle and you feel grouchy or you feel irritable or you feel like you have a ton of energy and you could do more of it or that you're being held back, you kind of know why, right? So like if someone's saying sit at your desk and only do this task today and you're in your spring, you're going to be jittery. You're going to be like, but I can do more, but can I go talk? Can I go socialize? Right. Because your body's just not apt for that. Right. And so the more we know this, the more we can get playful with it. And the same goes with partners. This is how I deal with my husband is like, for the most part, he's like, I don't want to know. But then at times when he's like, where are you at? As soon as I say a season, because he can relate to those words, he understands the language of it. Right. And so this past week, he had a work function on a Friday night and he had a work function on Sunday morning. And of course, I started bleeding on the Friday morning. And he was like, but I have these two things. And I was like, well, that's okay. Like we'll operate around it. But what I did then was I took my kids to the theater on Friday because I was like, I can't parent. I need to sit still and do nothing because I'm exhausted. So we went to the theater and we ordered in supper. So I did not cook because I have a strong policy of no cooking on my bleed days because it takes effort. And then on Sunday morning, like he went first thing in the morning, he was made sure he was home for lunchtime. And so I just put them in front of the TV. I was like, this is what it's got to be. And I just explained to him, like, listen, like you're doing these two things. I need Saturday completely to myself. Like, I know it may not seem like it's fair because this is your work stuff, but seriously, I really need to check out on Saturday. And so I did. Saturday, I stayed up in my room all day. I read a book. I did some things that I wanted to do for journaling and meditation, but I just took care of myself. And that made me feel more stable for Saturday when he wasn't there either, and that I could do a little bit more. So
Beautiful. Good idea.
yeah.
It is important to take care of us. We need to take care of us all, a lot more. We do as women. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like that when you're honoring that and knowing those things that you can, like, I like the way that you say you relate to it, because you're right. You're not always are you going to be able to just check out because you have something that you have to do. But if you
That's
know,
true.
here's how I can get around this to make this work out for the best, that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm. And there was a point where my husband was feeling really run down. Like it was during COVID and self-care was just really low. And he was just like, I'm burnt out too. And so how we had to work out it with us being both burnt out and having to homeschool and work was that I said, the first 2 weeks of my cycle, that's where I have the most energy. So go do stuff for yourself. Like as much as you need to care for yourself in my spring and in my summer, do what you need to do. But then in the last 2 weeks of my cycle, I really need you to give it your all and support me so I have more time off and I can take care of myself. And so that's how we had to operate for a few months there during COVID so that we could both rebound from being just burnt out. And it worked beautifully. It really did help us be in a communication of him understanding that if he pushed too hard, I was going to get snappy if I was in my inner fall because I'm tired and I've been doing a lot. Right. And so I think it's so much more compassion for us as women to not feel like we have to be the same person every day. And, my teacher that's out of England, that's one thing that she says. She's like, your husband thought he married one person, but he married 4 different women. And I'm like, yes, he did.
So how does that work then to figure out where you are in your seasons once you don't have your bleed anymore?
So when you don't have your bleed, I always say to go with the moon cycle. So that's a great place to start. Especially if you've started before when you had a cycle, you kind of know how you feel in each 4 of the seasons. So my cycle it's usually on the equinoxes, it starts to shift and I start to change so that I bleed on the full moon, not on the dark moon. And so, but the thing is that even with those shifts, I can feel my energy of like, oh, I'm really excited right now, or I'm really talkative. Then I know that I'm in my spring. And so if you have the physical, you can kind of map it out that way. And then when you don't have it, you kind of know how you already rhythmically feel. But if this is something brand new that you're starting to play with and you no longer have a bleed or you've had a hysterectomy, is go with the moon cycle, because traditionally this is how women always bled. Because we didn't have artificial lights, the new moon, the darkest time, actually communicates with our brain and says, like, this is the time for us to go dark. And when the full moon was its brightest, it would activate the pituitary and the pineal gland, and that would shift the hormone cycle for us. So it is actually true that we did cycle with moon energy because of how the light activated our brain and how our brain then corresponded with our endocrine glands. And so that's the best way to do it. Now we do have artificial light, so it does mess with us now. But if you're someone who doesn't have a cycle, it's a beautiful way to just start to live cyclically. And there's something just so healing. And then as you start to do this a few months, you might be feeling, well, actually, I kind of feel a little different. Like I feel like it's supposed to be like this. And then you just move it. You know that the moon cycle has four different stages. Break it up the same way that you have your new moon, your full moon, your waxing, and your waning moon, right? And then just kind of play with it that way. And I think that's the thing that I enjoyed most about learning this, is that it just got me more curious and more playful with my body. And it really inspired me to think outside the box and to question things. I don't actively do like a big chart every morning, and like I don't chart my temperature and all that stuff. But what I do is I mark out on the first day of my bleed. I just take like a regular calendar, like I don't know, August 2023. And as soon as my first day of my bleed is, I highlight a full week for winter, and then I change it to a different highlighter color, and I do another week for spring. And I do that for each of them. And then I just check in every day. I look at my day timer. It's like, oh yeah, I'm still in the yellow, which means I'm summer. And so I know, and I can plan my month that way too, which just helps me set myself up for success.
Huh, that's very interesting. That is, I've gone past all that. I'm 71, but I still feel healthy, and I find myself doing what you're saying. I still go through times where I'm in the summertime. It's just my time. I love summer, spring, and I love this fall too. But I do slow down in the fall, and I really slow down in the winter. So, but the summer, as soon as spring comes, it's like I'm hyped right up again, ready to fly with anything that's in front of me. That all makes sense to me too. As I'm maturing in life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so fun to play with, of knowing how we feel in the physical seasons, like the environmental seasons, and then getting curious about like, how does that feel in my body if I was to label my cycle or my 4 phases? And I always just say, like, if you do have a cycle, take the length of your cycle and divide it by 4 and give yourself a week experience in each of them. And then if you don't have a cycle, then just do it as like I said, off the moon chart, of like knowing that the dark moon is your menstruation, and do it for a full week, and then give yourself a week in each of the experiences. And even if you don't bleed, just kind of be playful with it, of like, oh, look at it's full moon now. I can get playful and I can do a little bit more. I can say yes to a lot more things. And then when it's the week after the full moon, just go, okay, you know what? I'm going to give my body a little bit of a downturn. I'm going to pretend like I'm actually in the environmental fall, and I'm going to give more gratitude. I'm going to do more harvesting. I'm going to clear up those little things in my life. Like really just get playful month to month of like, how can I internally feel these seasons exist within me as well?
I like that.
I
So
do
if
too.
someone has infertility or problems with their bleed, then how would that, like, does that shift the seasons then, or how does that work?
It sometimes shifts them a bit. So if you have a longer cycle, so like with PCOS would probably be the most prominent one that you're going to see effects in your cycle. The other conditions that you might see, they might not have that big of, well, unless if you're not bleeding, if you're not ovulating, or on birth control. Birth control is the other one. Birth control, you're not having an actual bleed. And so you can still get playful and still, like if you're in menopause, just try to feel that cyclical behavior, because the body does respond so much to us experiencing a 4-part shift, right? Like it wants to feel that we are constantly trying to mimic and trying to live in that cyclical life. So with PCOS in particular, that's the one where we can have really long cycles, sometimes 35 to 40-ish days. And so in those cases, what we would do is I always say, start to follow the moon cycle as if you were menopausal, and start to just practice being cyclical and trying to train the body that way. There's a thing called moon bathing, and it's thought that if you stand out underneath the full moon and allow your brain, your glands to be activated by the full moon energy, that will start to spur on an ovulation. That will start to work with that pineal gland and the pituitary gland and get everything talking to each other, because the brain is really the main controller of the hormones, because it talks to them, sends the neurotransmitters, it talks to the whole system, and it tells the ovaries and the uterus like when it's time to do what. Like it is the key of getting what hormones released at what time. And so the more that we can support that activity, the more that that's going to affect. And so like with PCOS, I say moon bathe every full moon. Start to show your body that you understand and you feel a behavior. And I would say that a lot of times with a lot of these conditions too, our body, it's scrambled because, or our menstrual cycle is scrambled because we haven't been living cyclically. So it's trying to talk to us however we're going to listen. Our body's super, super intelligent, and it just wants us to stop. So as much as we, hate painful periods and we may dread them and we might curse our period, pain is actually the body's way of saying, I need you to stop for a moment and reflect and change behavior. It's not an actual true indicator that something's being damaged or hurt in our body. And, I heard this from one of my teachers who was a pain science specialist. And he always said, think of like drinking a freezy or drinking a Slurpee. When you drink a Slurpee too fast, you get a brain freeze. And it's not actually because you've done damage to your brain. It's just the body's way of saying stop, right? And so I like to apply that same kind of concept to our menstrual cycle. If we're having painful periods, our body's just trying to get our attention. It's trying to say, listen, something's not right and we need to change our behavior. And so I personally believe like sometimes women definitely need a lot more tools. They might need, like I have a client who had to get a hysterectomy. And so, sometimes we need these bigger things, but there's so much that we can do by starting to be curious and starting to shift our behaviors and trying to live cyclically. And then we can layer on other things of, our food. If we eat cyclically as well, there's tons of research out there around eating for our hormones, of how to eat certain foods at certain stages of your cycle and how that can impact it. And so we have all these great natural resources to be able to bring the body back into balance. We don't always have to go to these extremities, or like I said, the birth control pill. I'm all for taking birth control if it's because we actually need to prevent a pregnancy to happen, but I'm not for it because we aren't actually exploring what is happening in our body. And I don't mean this on a personal level. I mean more of medicine of, one of the naturopathic doctors I follow calls it lazy medicine, right? Where we don't ask any questions. We're just like, you have acne, go on birth control pill. That will fix it, right? Like that's lazy medicine. That's not actually exploring what's happening in a woman's body and asking the bigger questions. And so if we're going on birth control because we're trying to stop pain or we're trying to cure acne, like all these little things, that's not a good enough reason. And so, this is where we have to know that we can advocate with our doctors and say, no, I don't like that. I want something different.
Good for that. Yeah, that's true. We need to pay attention. And I find even with my age, again, it's how I eat. Different times reminds me of how I'm eating. So I'm going through something different where I can feel my breast actually still working like they did when I was nursing sort of sometimes. So, and that's in my 70s. But I think it's because when you follow what you eat, it makes you feel so healthy. When you don't follow and you feel nasty, then those are the dark days, right? Yeah. So that makes sense to me too, even at my age.
Yeah, and it's so true. And an interesting little fun fact too is that men are cyclical too. It's just that testosterone, that hormone cycle is 24 hours. And so it makes sense why we have the circadian rhythm, or why it doesn't make sense. It's why we follow the circadian rhythm to set our work schedules, and why we do the things we do. And a lot of this, like, we won't get into it here, but like the patriarchal system really set us up as women for failure, because it didn't look at that we need a 28-day cycle, not a 24-hour cycle. And so I always joke, for women that are struggling with PMS symptoms in that inner fall, our inner fall is a time where we're supposed to say no. And what the problem is we often say yes a lot in our ovulation, because we're like, yeah, I can do it all. Like, I'm feeling the summer vibes, I'll say yes. But we say yes to things that are going to land in our inner fall. And then when it comes time to do those tasks, we're like, crap, I don't have the energy, I don't have the time, I don't want to do this. And it's a totally different feeling. So if we're saying yes, it has to be in the summer. We can't dip our toes in the fall, or at least be prepared to know that that's what we've done. But it's really interesting when you look at the testosterone and the reset clock. A male's inner fall would be around that 6 to 11 o'clock at night. So when they come home from work, and I know my father was this way, my husband's definitely this way. He's going to be like, you're telling all my secrets. But he comes home and it's like, I need a moment. I just got off work. I just need to sit and relax, and you can't bug me with anything. And then often, if like the kids are all over him, then it's like, well, I'm going to go take a 30-minute bathroom break with my tablet and my phone. And it's not because it actually takes 20 or 30 minutes to have a bowel movement. It's because he wants to escape. He wants to be away from everything. And that's what, as women, we're asking for in our inner fall, is we start to get snappy. We start to get angry. We get resentful because we're not given space to rest either. And so we need a 7-day bathroom break is what we need. And we'll feel much better.
Right.
But exactly. But if you look at the seasons, like spring, when you first wake up in the morning, that would be a testosterone rush of spring, of just like, okay, I'm going to work, I'm getting the things done. And then by lunch, we're chatty Cathy, we're talking to everyone. And then we come home and we're in that inner fall. And then their menstruation, they get to sleep. So
that doesn't seem fair, but but it's like, I like that, because it's so true. And that you say that, because my husband's much the same way, right? It's like, okay, I just need a minute when I get home to just down from everything and everybody. And so it actually works out well, because he gets home before me, so by the time I get home, he's had that little bit of time to be down, and then it's like, okay, good, now we can just have a relaxing
relaxing night. And
absolutely,
that's what we as women want too in our inner fall. We want to know that we have permission to say no. And we often feel like we don't have that permission. And so this is for you to regain your power back and say, yes, I can say no.
I think it's great too, because I think society has told us for so long as women that we have to do everything, right? We have to raise the kids and clean the house and go to work if we have to, and do all these different things. And it's so nice that, like, people like you that are getting this word out there, that we can honor our bodies and honor these seasons of our lives to say no when we should be.
Yeah. And knowing that there's a time where we probably can do a lot more and we feel great doing it. And then there's another time where we feel pretty awful and we need to call in the help. We need to call in the resources, because women weren't meant to do it all. This was like something that just hundreds of years ago shifted, where all of a sudden the expectation was that we would. And then as modern society took over and the industrial age happened, now we're doing all the things that we're told that we're supposed to do, but now we're also supposed to be in the workplace. And so like, it's just been layers upon layers of us not being able to catch our breath. And I have this amazing coach that I worked with for a bit. And she calls it her modern marriage, where her and her husband had to come back into agreement of them to understand that she does not like to do certain tasks. And when one of her tasks that she had us do was to list out everything that you do, from buying Christmas presents to planning birthday parties, like everything that has to humanly happen in a year, and who does it all, and look at whose name is on there majority of the time. And so my husband and I did this, and it was quite shocking to see how little his name was up there. And then I was like, okay, so some of these things I do like doing, right? And I really want to do them. Like, it means a lot to me to plan my kids' birthdays, but I hate doing the dishes after cooking supper. Like, and so it had to be this conversation of like, if you don't want to do it and I don't want to do it, then why do I still have to do it? Right. And so in that case, we might have to hire out, like we may have to look for other resources. So, or we take turns of both knowing that we have to do something that we both don't like doing, but it shouldn't be just me that has to do it. So
absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I also liked what you said about the circadian rhythm, because I just see all this research coming out now, because like you said, we have all this artificial light and our bodies are so messed up, really, because of that, right? Because back in the day, you rose with the sun and you went to bed when it stopped, because you didn't have this light and you had no choice.
Yeah.
You couldn't lay in bed and, scroll Netflix or TikTok for hours and hours. You had to get your rest because your next day was starting. And I just find that very interesting, because I'm just seeing a lot of things come forward about that. So
yeah, like there's really no rhyme or reason why we've structured the workday. We've structured it besides because someone told us that that's how it had to be. Right. And that's the thing. Like, I want women to feel empowered, is just to question these things in their life. Like, why am I doing this when I really don't know why? Like, whoever told me that this was the way it had to be? So like, even with our work life, when we look at it, our first half of our cycle, we have way more capabilities of doing a lot more stuff. Like, we have way more energy. We have our batteries full if we've rested during our inner winter. Where when we enter our inner winter, that first day or two, we need a lot of rest. And for me, it's actually the day before my bleed starts. It's amazing how I know that my bleed's coming the next day, because I wake up and I'm like, I usually feel like I'm sick, or I always get like a scratchy throat. I'm like, do I have a sore throat? And it's because my body is preparing me to stay still. And it always, the very next day, I'm exhausted. So if this is the case, then if we are at a job where it's task orientated and I have to get these tasks done, does it really matter where? First of all, and I think this is one of the beautiful things that COVID gave us, was that we could work from home, and it showed people that they could trust us to work from home. And so we challenged the way things were. And so now when we're bleeding, can we work from home, or can we take a day off? This is a new movement that's happening. It's starting to move a little bit. Some places are starting to do it, of the period policy, where women can have the first day or two of their bleed off. And in return, if that's the case, we could put in an extra 2 hours during our inner summer and in our inner spring to make up those 2 days that we lost, and we wouldn't feel the impact. We have the stamina. We'd be like, okay, I can work another 2 hours. It's not a big deal. But it's us questioning these systems and going, but this doesn't work for me anymore. So I need to change it.
I agree with that.
And I read
I'm lucky because I have a female boss, so I think she gets it. So when you do call in, you're like, hey, not feeling that good, gonna stay home today. She gets it, right? Because she will also convey that message. Hey, this is what's happening. I'm gonna stay home. Perfect. I might work from home this afternoon. I might just not.
Yeah.
Which is excellent when you can do those kind of things, right? And have that supportive environment.
Yeah. And I read this article when I was doing research for The Working Woman and the Cyclical Life. And someone had wrote this article, and I can't remember who it was now. I wish I could, but she wrote an article saying that if this feels really weird to request period days off, think of what it felt like when the very first maternity leave happened. The first time a woman took a maternity leave, I'm sure every man in the office was like, this is unfair. This is unfair. Why does she get time off because she had a baby, right? But now it's something that's so standard, at least in Canada. There's definitely
Mhm.
some countries like the US that aren't pro maternity leave, but this is where like it may feel uncomfortable in the beginning to ask for these things, but
Mhm.
it can happen and it can become normal policy, right? So
Well, and I think that's a great thing. I
yeah.
do, and I love that we're starting to speak up and empower ourselves with the medical world, because I think for so long we've been kind of stifled down, and it is time to rise up, kind of do this revival and be like, hey, how do I,
Mhm.
advocate for myself and my body and do those things. So
Be ourselves completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Know ourselves inside out. We should know that as women and men too.
Yeah.
It's important.
And I think as more and more women are stepping forward right now saying, I want this, I'm curious about this, we're
Mhm.
setting the stage for our youth to ask and to get and to receive. One thing that I can honestly say has been a big stimulation for me to continue in this work is because I have two daughters. I have two daughters, and then my third is a son. And my two daughters, I'm like, this needs to be different for you. We are having these conversations in our house now. You see how I am, because I want you to understand that you can ask for these things too.
True.
And I think it's so powerful as women for us to know this information if we have youth, because, and this is a really cool way to think of it, I think, at least, is when you think of girls in puberty who haven't been taught about their cyclical nature, and they have a test. Okay, so like progesterone, like I said, it sedates the brain and it's there during our fall season. And then in our menstruation, all of our hormones drop, which is what signals the body to release the uterus. So if a girl in high school is given a test during her bleed days, her brain is literally sedated. Like it is cloudy, it's foggy. She doesn't have critical thinking skills because she's going through hormone withdrawal right now. And it's needed for her uterus to release. And so if a student is normally at like, I don't know, an 85% student, like she normally aces everything, and all of a sudden she does this test and she gets 65, rather than going, well, you should have studied harder, we could have that conversation of going, well, where were you at in your cycle? Like as a parent saying, well, where were you at? And she's like, well, I was bleeding. Well, that's why, hon. Like you're not a failure. This was your body. This was what was happening. You know, it's not anything that you've done. Like let go of that. Don't let that play on your self-esteem. Or as educators, we could go, this person usually gets really good. She didn't do that good. Knowing that she's a teen girl, maybe I should give her an opportunity to retest in a week and see what
Right.
happens then. Like
That'd be
this is
nice.
where we create flexibility. But we
Mhm.
can only do that if we start to acknowledge the menstrual cycle and its potency and how much it does affect us, right? Versus treating us as every human being the same, right? We're not cookie
Right.
cutter.
exactly. No, I
Yeah.
think that's great. And that's good, because we're raising our granddaughter. So this information is, I'm soaking it in, because it's like, ooh, I can look at it doing this a different way, right? To
Mhm.
parent better, to provide those opportunities for her to get to know her own body and her own cycles, and then B, for me to look at it in a different
A
way.
different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like with progesterone, it makes us question relationships a lot too, right? Like I know for myself, if I'm going to question my marriage, it's going to be in my inner fall every time. It's going to be like, why did I marry him? And it's only in my inner fall it happens. And that's because of hormones. But this is the same thing happens with teens with friendships. Like, they start to question about, well, does my friend really like me? Or I think they're talking behind my back. Like we start to question, we get so emotionally consumed, where if we are already living cyclically, if we are mimicking our cycle, it's very easy for us to hold space for them and to talk them through it. And,
Right.
I like to believe that if we started to shift this, how would that help with teen depression? How would that help with suicidal rates? How would that help with self-worth? How would that help with teen pregnancies? Right? If women, if
True.
girls
Me.
started to know their body and know why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and knowing that they're not wrong, they're not broken, they're not liked. And so just starting to question things a little bit more and be more of that rod. And then, I have a little boy who's 4 years old, and he's going to be the best little husband ever because he's going to have me teaching him it, his sisters. Like, we're going to be a very period positive household.
That's good. That's good.
And this is what our boys need. They need to know that, yeah, it looks different, but it's because it needs to be different. And they have superpowers if I just let them have it and on their schedule versus me trying to conform them to mine. So
absolutely. No, that's awesome. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Like, you have so much information. I absolutely love it. And can you tell everybody where they can find you?
So if you want to learn more about cycle syncing, I do have a podcast. It's called Aligned Womb, Aligned You. I try my best to get one out every Wednesday, but I'm a mom and it's really hard sometimes. So if I miss an episode, I'm really trying hard. But yeah, that's a great place to go. I have some great guest speakers that come on to talk about their practices and what they do to help clients heal their cycle. And then people can find me on Instagram at The Aligned Womb. So The Aligned Womb, make sure you have that in there. And then you can also find me at my website, which is She Revival. She has 2 E's because it stands for Sacred Healing Through Embodiment and Empowerment. And so it is an acronym. So, and yeah, you can find me there. And I have some memberships that you can join. I have some courses. I'm always running different courses. So yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I encourage people to do it because I there was so much information and it just made me rethink some things of myself. Right. So, and you said you had a special giveaway, a cycle meditation series.
Yeah. So I have a special meditation series that anyone's more than welcome to go sign up for. It has a meditation for each of your seasons. So to match the energy and to kind of get you in that embodiment practice of what your hormones are asking for.
Beautiful.
That's wonderful. And that's on your website, I assume.
Yeah, it is it's on the homepage right below, like, hey, this is who I am. It's right there. That's the very next thing. So.
Nice. Well, I'm going to go check that out myself.
Yeah,
well,
we will do that.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure talking with you and getting all this information. And I'm sure all of our listeners are just going to absolutely love it. So
they are. And hopefully one day we'll have a chance to meet you in Edmonton.
Yes.
Not that far away.
Yes, I would love that. And I would just like to say, first of all, thank you for having me, but also how excited I was when I seen that it was going to be a mother-daughter duet hosting this. I was like, we need more of this. So I'm so excited that you have this offering.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're very lucky, and I feel very grateful that we get to do this together. And
we sure are grateful. That's for sure. It's beautiful. And meeting people like yourself, it's wonderful. What a beautiful world we live in.
Yes,
thank you so much.
So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see everybody next week. And make sure you like and follow us, subscribe,
and
all
love us
good
too.
things.
Love us too.
Okay, thank you, everyone.